Most people think successful people have more discipline. That's usually not true. What they actually have is fewer points of fragmentation. They do not operate randomly. They do not constantly switch. They do not allow every notification, every emotion, every distraction, or every impulse to control the direction of their day. Because they understand something most people do not. In a world filled with infinite input, attention becomes survival. And the people who cannot control their attention eventually lose control of their direction. That is why most people now feel mentally exhausted without building anything meaningful. Not because they are working too hard. It's because they are switching too often, reacting too often, resetting too often. And if you do not build systems against that, your life slowly becomes controlled by whatever captures your focus next. Most people waste enormous amounts of energy making unnecessary decisions. What to work on, when to start, whether they feel like doing it, what deserves attention first, what deserves attention now. Builders reduce this friction aggressively. They standardize important behaviors, their wake-up times, their work blocks, exercise windows, deep focus periods, creation schedules, input limits. Not because structure is exciting. It's because repeated decision-making drains execution capacity. Every unnecessary choice weakens consistency. This is why reactive people often feel busy all day while producing very little. Their attention constantly resets. Builders avoid this. They create repeatable operating patterns because consistency is easier to maintain than constant self-correction. And eventually, their systems begin carrying them forward, even when motivation disappears. That is the goal. Not emotional intensity, but operational stability. Most people protect their schedule. Builders protect their attention. Those are not the same thing. You can have free time and still be mentally fragmented, because fragmentation is not physical. It's cognitive. Builders understand that every time there is an interruption, it has a cost. Every notification, every tab switch, every random check, every unnecessary conversation, every algorithmic distraction. Each one breaks momentum, and momentum matters more than most people realize. Because once focus collapses, re-entry becomes difficult. This is why many people spend entire days feeling mentally scattered. Their brain never stabilizes long enough to enter deep execution. Builders intentionally reduce interruption points, sometimes dramatically. Phone put away. Notifications off. Single task environments. Fixed work windows. Controlled media intake. Not because they hate technology. It is because they understand. Attention fragmentation destroys depth. And depth is where meaningful work is built. One of the biggest reasons people drift is because they never define completion clearly. everything stays vague. Work on the business. Improve myself. Get productive. Make progress. That language creates endless motion without measurable execution. Builders define outcomes specifically. Not, I'll work on the project, but I will complete this section. Not, I'll study, but I will finish this module and take notes. Not, I'll exercise, but I will complete this exact workout. Being specific creates closure, and closure creates momentum, because unfinished mental loops drains attention constantly. That is why many people feel overwhelmed. Their brain is carrying dozens of undefined tasks simultaneously. Builders reduce cognitive overload through operational clarity. They define what completion means before beginning, and that changes everything. Because vague goals create emotional exhaustion. Defined targets create execution. Modern culture rewards stimulation. Builders reward completion. That is a massive difference. Most people now spend their lives chasing novelty, excitement, inspiration, emotional spikes, constant engagement. But builders understand something dangerous about stimulation. It trains dependency on emotional activation, meaning people don't act unless they feel ready. That destroys consistency. Builders operate differently. They understand repetition creates identity, not excitement. So they stop chasing emotional intensity and start respecting the process of consistency. That means showing up when tired, continuing when bored, repeating systems, finishing difficult work, staying with things long enough to compound. Because compounding only happens through continuity. Drifters constantly restart. Builders continue. That is why builders eventually separate themselves. Not because they move faster. It is because they stop resetting. Most people underestimate environmental influence. Builders do not. They understand your environment quietly shapes your behavior every day. If your environment encourages distraction, you will drift more easily. If your environment encourages focus, execution becomes easier. This is why builders intentionally modify their surroundings. They have clean workspaces, reduced clutter, single-purpose environments, controlled noise, limited visual distractions, intentional routines. Small changes matter because behavior is heavily affected by friction. The easier distractions become, the more often it happens. The easier focus becomes, the more often it stabilizes. Builders stop relying entirely on willpower. Instead, they reduce unnecessary resistance. Because systems outperform emotional efforts long term. Always. Momentum is one of the most misunderstood forces in human behavior. People think motivation creates action, but often it is action that creates motivation. Builders understand this. So instead of waiting to feel inspired, they begin moving first. Small completions, small progress, small executions, and those small actions create psychological reinforcement. Progress creates energy. Energy creates continuation. Continuation creates momentum. This is why inactivity becomes dangerous, because drift compounds exactly the same way momentum does. The longer you delay, the harder re-entry becomes. Builders recognize and interrupt drift quickly. They restart quickly. They recover quickly. They re-engage quickly, because they understand consistency is not perfection. It is recovery speed. And the people who recover faster maintain direction longer. Most people try to change behavior without changing identity. That rarely lasts. Builders eventually stop asking, "What should I do today?" and begin asking, "How does a builder operate?" That changes behavior completely, because identity stabilizes action. When execution becomes tied to identity, consistency becomes easier to maintain. That is why recurring doctrine matters. Builders stay, drifters switch. That's not just a slogan, it's operational psychology. Builders understand direction is protected through repeated self-definition, not occasional motivation. And eventually, their standards become automatic. Not because life became easier, it's because identity became stronger than impulse. The future will not belong to the people with the most access. Access is already everywhere. The future will belong to the people who can maintain direction inside environments designed to fragment them. People who can focus deeply, repeat consistently, eliminate aggressively, recover quickly, and continue building when distraction is easier. Because most people are slowly becoming reactive systems, builders refuse that. They define, they structure, they execute intentionally, and over time, that creates separation. If you want to stay relevant in a world constantly competing for your attention, and you want to learn how to operate intentionally before distractions become your default identity, subscribe. This is D.B. Lewis, and I will see you in the next one.